Okay, Lily, welcome to It's My Pleasure. I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. Thanks for coming on.
I'm so excited to dive in. It's going to be
Yay.
great.
Okay, so you wrote a book.
Yes, I did.
So everybody go check out this book. Thank you more, please. We're going to get into some of the nitty gritty, but I just want to start with, why? Like, why writing a book, I
hmm
am guessing from what I have heard, is not like the easiest thing.
No.
So, what inspired you to go through the suffering of book writing, but also just like give us a little bit more of your background, how you landed in this space, and then eventually what inspired you to write the book?
Amazing. So I started my career in the feminist nonprofit advocacy space. So my heart has always been for the well-being of women and girls. When I burnt out of the nonprofit world, the first act of my career, I call it, I moved to New York. I was like, needed side jobs because I wanted to live here and I needed money and had a bunch of side hustles. And it just so happened that my friend was a matchmaker at this national firm and she was like, they're hiring, you should apply. And I thought, that's hilarious. Like, I that's hilarious. Like, why would I ever want to work in the dating space? Like, I was a
Yeah.
late bloomer. I had never, I had like a high school love, but as an adult, I didn't have a lot of romantic experience at all. I didn't have much sexual experience at all. I was evangelical growing it like sort of in that like love waits, like abstinence only vibe, which we can
Yeah.
get into later. But I again, all of this led to being like, LOL, hilarious that I would be a matchmaker. I don't know what I'm doing in my dating life. But I applied and I, again, needed a side job. And I went through this rigorous application and interview process. And I had my EQ is off the charts, at least for other people at that time, my
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, my ability to ask deeper questions, my ability to see beneath the surface. So I got the job. I started doing well at the job.
Yeah.
And after a year, I was the third most successful matchmaker out of 160 at that national firm.
Amazing.
Yes, amazing. And my own
Yeah.
love life was a dumpster fire.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was like, I was so exhausted from the stories in my head of like,
Mhm.
you're too much, being raised in the deep South, being sensitive, opinionated, bossy. I was told constantly, you're too much, even by
Yeah.
my mom at age 12. And that really, like, you're too much, you're going to have a hard time finding a husband. And that carried with me into
Mm.
adulthood, into the decisions I was making in my dating life, the late bloomer anxiety that I was experiencing of, you don't know what you're doing, you're
Yeah.
too late. When people find out, especially dating in New York, if we're talking about sex, it's like the expectation is that people have, generally, this is a
Yeah.
generalization, the
Yeah.
expectation is that people have sex pretty quickly. And I was petrified of being found
Mhm.
out, quote unquote, of like, I don't know what to do or how to do it. And
Yeah.
so all of that led to some like scarcity swiping and going on a date with this guy that met everything on my checklist. It was
Mhm.
great on
Mhm.
paper.
Yeah.
And we fell in love very quickly. We had sex. It was very fun, very like communicative. I was glad for that. And it was very quickly revealed to me that this was like a person who could meet none of my needs. He
Mm.
asked, we said, I love you. We became exclusive. We had this conversation about monogamy. And then we went on this trip together to Paris that I write all about in the book. All of the
Yeah.
details are in the book. It was a fiery hellscape. But at this trip to Paris, he was like, I need to be open or I can't be in a relationship, like our
Mhm.
first night in Paris. And while non monogamy is great for some people, it was not for me. But I forced myself into this relationship,
Yeah.
into this model, into this, shoving my needs into a box for a year while I
Mm.
was also a top matchmaker.
Mhm.
And so once I was no longer willing to live out of alignment after a year of suffering, after a year of crying every day, after a year of sticking around, even though none of my needs were being met, and asking myself, why am I doing this? I'm a feminist. I don't want to be in this paradigm, but I'm here and I'm miserable, but I can't seem to get out. Right. After a year in great therapy, I decided to leave that relationship. But then I looked around, I was like, now what?
Yeah.
Now what? How do I never settle again? How do I trust myself now that I have settled for so long?
Yeah.
And by the way, this is my first adult relationship. I was a late bloomer. Now what do? I don't know how to move forward. So I looked around for support. My therapist hadn't dated in 30 years. My friends just told me to swipe more. My matchmaking career was a first date level solution. And I knew I needed something so much deeper than a first date. So I started exploring coaching for myself. I started, practicing self-compassion for the first time. I started understanding my own preferences underneath the surface, underneath the checklist for the first time. And what was born is this like really agency-filled, joyful dating life where I was giving my number to strangers who I found cute. I was like flirting with abandon. I came out as bisexual to myself and my family and friends. I was feeling myself for the first time in my love life. And I started to coach my matchmaking clients, and they found better dates for themselves than I or anybody else could find for them. I was like, oh my God, this is so good. And then the bonus was I met my husband, Chris, with this joy building strategy that I now teach my clients. And he's somebody who I might have missed had I not done this deeper work, had I not gotten beneath the surface of my rigidity in the past. And so 6-7 years ago, I broke up with matchmaking and started Date Brazen, and have since been a feminist dating coach, helping so many people around the world build epic, subtle proof love lives that are joyful and that lead to extraordinary love on their terms. So I started this business. It was a very slow growth. And I had one client my entire first year of coaching. I am so grateful for her. She's still, I follow her on Instagram. I saw her get married like last year or the year before. I was so happy for her, and so happy that her life is so expansive and like on her terms. And then the second to third year, I went to this like creativity summit with this group called the Spark File with Susan Blackwell and Laura Kamian. We were in a circle. It was like January 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And at the end of this 3-day creativity summit, you had to claim a project. And on my heart, in my body, in my intuition, I just felt like my work was going to be bigger than I could even imagine. And I was very scared of that. And I was very nervous about it. I felt like sort of like, who am I? But through this work of really examining my deep desire, I came to a realization that I didn't just want to coach people one-on-one. I didn't just want to coach, even though that's amazing work. I wanted to disrupt the dating industry. And I want to disrupt how dating is done. And I want to create a more joyful, expansive, feminist, inclusive, intersectional feminist path forward for people to shed the patriarchal bullshit of the dating world and really step into a dating life that is reflective of our agency. Especially as women or people socialized as women. So I claimed then, I want to write a book. And I don't know how it's going to happen. This is January 2020. And I said, I'm going to start with a podcast, and every episode I'm going to explore a different topic. And that's when I started my podcast. We're now at 200 episodes. And it was a long, long time of figuring out how to do the book. But it was claimed then in January 2020, because I want to disrupt the dating industry and help people build epic, joyful love lives that lead to extraordinary love on their terms.
I love it. So good. So many good nuggets in there. And I love hearing people's stories, right? Because it's like, that is what makes us, I think such good coaches and good teachers. It's like the difference, what you're talking about, like the matchmaking, right? Versus like really seeing such a difference with this process that you created through your own story, and how different that can be. It doesn't mean that we can't be really good at something that we haven't gone through, but like really finding your genius because it relates so much to your own story, because you had to put yourself through that growth and those mindset shifts and all the other things that I'm sure that we'll talk about a little bit. But I think it goes to show that it's like, as women too, even though we can be so good, because we're fucking amazing, we're so talented in so many ways, right? When you apply your own like truth and honesty and process, what can really come out of that? Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back to a little bit, because this was a bit of a theme in your book and also just in the story that you talked about. And so many women a lot of women are in different places listening to this podcast. Some are dating and some have been in these long-term partnerships. And so I'm sure they're hearing you and you're like, for a year, I did this. And in the back of my head, I'm like, there's people that have been doing this for 25 years listening to this podcast too, right? And putting themselves in this box, like that didn't meet needs, that wasn't really what they asked. And you had this quote, and I just wanted to read it in the book. It says, it's the impulse to stay with someone wrong for you because of your fear that no one else would want to be with you. And that was such a huge one. And going back to like things, that your mother said about like this too much. So I would love for you just to talk a little bit about in that vein of just like that impulse and like that fear and what women can really do if they're noticing there are these signs, or maybe what are some of the signs that you noticed that was keeping you from looking outside and taking that courageous step because of that like really deep fear of like this is it, like this is my opportunity, this is I have this because I don't know who else would be with me if I didn't.
Well, this is such a great question, and I think to really ground it, if you are wondering, am I settling? Is that like the signs that you might be settling either for, there's settling is inaction.
Yep.
I think that if you notice a problem and you're not actively saying, I deserve to figure this out, let's take proactive steps. Inaction is a version of settling. I think that also like over functioning, if you find yourself micromanaging your relationship because you're afraid that your partner won't show up for you, or you find yourself afraid to ask for what you want, but so you're just keeping busy everywhere else because you're afraid of asking for what you want, that can be a version of settling. So I think it could be like identifying where you feel like you're shrinking, or where you feel like you're hustling in your relationship, either with yourself or a partner, to then look for clues of like, what's beneath the surface here? What do I want that is not in the present? What do I want that I can bring into being? Or what do I want that I haven't asked for yet? Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, like a follow-up question then to that, right, is like, you talk about like this place of like agency and empowerment. So like, where is it, or how do you help like your clients decide, like, is this something that it's really just me standing in my power and asking for versus like, am I just settling in this relationship and this person isn't good for me? Because when I've heard my girlfriends going through the dating that I talk to right now, and so much of what comes up, and because I'm close friend and I'm honest, I'm like, I love you. And like, that's not a them thing. Like,
like, how do you
like,
know what's a them thing versus a you thing?
Yeah. So like when we talk about like that settling, I think it's really easy sometimes for us to be like, oh, well, this doesn't feel good, so this person must not be good. So how do you even get to that place about like, am I even asking for what I want, or am I even showing up how I want in this relationship before I just go straight to like thinking it's the person?
Yeah. Well, and my friend Carl Lowenthal of the Unfuck Your Brain podcast talks a lot about how when she fell in love, it felt terrible.
Yeah.
Like fell in love with the right person for her. It felt terrible because our nervous systems, if we're not used to receiving a love that is accepting, a love that is maybe gentle, a love that we're not used to. Like I experienced this when I met Chris. It is somewhat intolerable, or it has been for me, to receive and accept the kind of love that I only dreamed existed. Now, people who are single and dating might roll their eyes and say like, oh, yeah, right. Like I just get me in that relationship. I can't wait. Both and this is why I think that doing the work of owning what you want out loud, which is something that women and people socialized as women are actively socialized to not do.
Right.
They're we are actively socialized to not ask for what we want because it will disrupt the status quo, that we will be labeled too much, that, our ultimate duty is to just stay in line, stay in line and play our role in this life, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise you're going to be single forever, you spinster, right?
Yeah.
So we are socialized to not ask for what we want. So I think that it's preparing to be in the right relationship and preparing to like exist in one long term, if that's what you want, is a practice of owning what you want out loud and often and releasing self-judgment of what you want. And so I think that if you're beginning a new relationship or you're in a relationship and you feel anxious, for example, it's important to drill down like, okay, my job is to care for my anxiety. It is not my partner's job to fix my anxiety. I've struggled with this in the past in my relationship, expecting Chris to know exactly what to say, expecting Chris to say all the right things, to basically be a therapist who doesn't do anything wrong.
Oh, yeah. I've done that with George multiple times over the years. Like, wait a minute. Why are you not taking care of me? It's like, I can't take care of that.
Right. Like you need to take care of your own anxiety so that you can.
He's like, do you want a hug? And I was like, that would help. That's a good start. Like,
right. Absolutely. Well, and that's the thing about being with a partner. If you know that a partner, if we're doing a very simplified rubric, is your partner willing to learn how to love you better?
Yeah.
And are you asking them to? I think that's the thing of like people who rush into like, oh, this just doesn't feel good. I think first starting with like, are you asking for what you want in a clear-ish way? It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And is your partner asking you like, okay, well, how can I love you better? Are they willing to shift things? And are you willing to shift things to love them better? I think that it's got to be that reciprocal kind of relationship to not be settling.
Yes. I love everything that you're saying. And I think, it goes in line with so much of what I've seen, even in long-term relationships and in like the work that I do, right, is that sometimes, like especially, and I know you and I have both experienced this personally, going through growth feels like shit. Like it feels worse. And we interpret any like somatic experience in our body of like this kind of discomfort or anxiety as like a red flag. Like, oh, this must mean it's a no, or this must mean it's not good for me, or I shouldn't. When really, like you're saying, it's because that's not what we're used to, especially as women receiving pleasure and opening up to joy and love when it's always been more anxious and chaotic.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of a couple things. Number one, the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, that like it is very uncomfortable to go to the next phase of getting what you want. It's very uncomfortable. And it's important to be aware of your discomfort and aware of like how you might be getting exactly what you want in your love life and how that might be really scary. And if you are having trouble even piecing through this, you're like, oh my God, okay, well, am I settling or am I not settling? What are that? I have a really simple metaphor. It's a self-coaching tool that I use for myself and I encourage my clients to use, SOFT, soft. And I talk a lot about these pieces in my book as well. This like, and let me unpack it. So to unpack whether or not you're settling or whether or not you need to do your own nervous system care work or whether or not you need to ask for more, do this. SOFT, self-compassion. Self-compassion is a radical practice. I know you talk about it and like it's so life-changing.
It's like the basis of all of the things that we want. It's the biggest thing we can do. Yeah.
And as a high achiever, you might be rolling your eyes and saying, God damn it, they're talking about self-compassion again. I don't want to hear this. It's not just going easy on yourself for the sake of going easy on yourself. It is a clinically proven resource. 2014 study out of Stanford showed that self-compassion reduces cortisol and increases resilience. Two things that you need to attract and be in the best relationship of your life. Self-compassion.
Or have good sex.
Or have good sex. Period. Yes.
Yeah.
Or do anything. So self-compassion can sound like, of course you're struggling. Of course you don't know what to do. Of course you're feeling anxious. That makes total sense based on where you were raised, how you were raised, what you were brought up to believe about yourself. This makes total sense. The kindest, most real, of course. Number 2, OSO, own your needs. So on a piece of paper, write down, what do I need right now? Do I need a hug? Do I need to take a walk? Do I need to call a friend? Do I need to jump up and down because my body is anxious and anxiety is your body asking for movement? What do you need? Write it down. Triage your own support needs. SOF, feel your feelings. Now, this is a tough one. I know you talk about it a lot too. But if you practice feeling your feelings without judgment. It's not going to mean that you're there forever. It's not that you're going to linger there. It's going to swallow you whole. If you have the skill of emotional granularity, which is a term coined by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett that said, when you have more precise emotion words to describe your experience, you're more likely to be able to move through that said experience effectively. So if you can name your emotion in your body, name how it feels. You can even use a feelings wheel if you are unsure where to start. And then naming it and then saying, one of my favorite thoughts by Simone Seol, I'm willing to feel anything to be with you. There's nothing that you could say, do, or feel that would make me want to stop being your friend. And like taking 3 minutes to be like, oh shit, I'm feeling shame. I'm feeling shame. Oh God, it feels uncomfortable. Let it rise and then it will pass if you allow it. SOFT, final step, thoughts, not facts. Yeah. So then it's like brain dumping on a piece of paper. What thoughts are you having about yourself, about this relationship, about this person? And how can you acknowledge that these are thoughts, not facts? And then if you need to, you can start the process over. But after doing SOFT, you'll have so much more clarity about how to care for yourself, what to ask for to get your needs met, and how to advocate for yourself moving forward.
Yeah, that's such a good tool. And, I really like how you put the thoughts part last, because I think a lot of people, when they go into the coaching world and they do want to take a look at their thoughts and they do want to take responsibility, oftentimes when we are taking a look at our thoughts, it is from a very judgmental place because our nervous system is still so out of whack. Like we can't actually see it without judgment. We can't actually see it in a new light because we're still in high alert. And this is just a little neuroscience lesson for all of you. This is why Lily created this tool this way. Okay. So listen to her with the steps, because if your brain is seeing red, which is what we do when we're triggered and we're not feeling good, then you can't see your thoughts differently. Like it really is hard, and you're going to be more judgmental and trigger more of the emotions that you just worked through. So brain dumps are amazing, but do this loving yourself. Of course, my love, dropping into your body, being what you need, feeling your feelings first so that you can actually move forward with the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
sometimes I do a brain dump, then just a major self-compassion. Sometimes I do an owning my needs and then a self-compassion. Sometimes I do a little out of order, but you're like, I fully co-sign that doing thought work or doing like reframing thoughts without self-compassion, without nervous system care is not going to work.
It doesn't work. Yeah. Yeah. Because we end up judging ourselves more and not even realizing it and throwing ourselves into a place of should, into one of the boxes we're trying to get out of to begin with.
And to ground this in examples of dating specifically, or maybe even having sex specifically, I coming into this episode, I was thinking of my clients who will listen to this, who might identify as late bloomers, who maybe haven't had a lot of physical experience before with another person, and what they might glean from this. And so let's just ground it in that. If you are feeling any type of shoulding, self-judgment, self-blame about your experience or lack thereof, or you're afraid that your experience or lack thereof, whether you're divorced after 20 years or you have never been in a relationship and you're 38, that self-judge, if you are swimming in that self-judgment, you're not going to be able to move yourself forward powerfully or effectively. You're going to be stuck in the, what I, experienced of the settling energy. Small settling is self-blaming all over yourself before you even start dating. That kind of small settling leads to big settling later on. And so SOFT or even nervous system care will really allow you to be more resourced to then take on, Danielle, your work of like, okay, I know you give action steps as well as the deeper mindset, and like to do the action steps effectively, you got to start with this stuff.
And like you said, it's such an eye roll. We've heard it a million times. And, and sometimes I think the thing is like, I have to use a different tone, with getting myself on board with the idea of self-compassion, especially when you're in that go, go, go kind of high achiever mode. For everyone listening to this, like however you want to present it to your brain so it's more digestible, so you actually do it, do that, So for a while, what I had to do was actually talk to my brain of like, that's why I brought in like, you don't have access to your prefrontal cortex, or your amygdala is like all big and like gray and bulgy and pulsy right now, like whatever it is, right? But like when I talk to myself and I don't use the words like self-compassion, I'm like, we are just trying to come back to so we can see things clearly. Like
Right.
that kind of language to get you to do this, if your brain is still not on board with the idea of being compassionate, don't call it compassion. Just call it like, regulation, call it becoming clearer, becoming like back to ground zero, like resourcing. Like sometimes we have to, when our brain is being super resistant to the softness, to like be like, work with it, like find a way that it can be more digestible for your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, if you want to be in the best relationship of your life with yourself and a future partner and the friends that you attract, then this creates the bedrock of that emotional safety to receive what you want.
Yeah. Because then you don't become codependent and stay in a year-long relationship that's not meant for you.
And to the point of like, oh my God, Lily only was in that relationship for a year and I've been in this bad relationship, or I was in it for 25 years. Like it felt longer, number one, felt longer than a year. Sure. Number two, I do think that time in the wrong relationship, especially if it's like a really wrong relationship.
Yeah.
Like not just a relationship where you're like, oh, well, I'm great. I learned something and I still have love for that person. But one where you're like, I hope to never see you again. I hope to never see you again. One where I'm on the street and I think you're a couple paces in front of me and my body goes into fight, flight, or freeze still. Right? Like, like not just I wish I hadn't done that. It does, it for me, eroded my ability to trust myself.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so that, I think, really, this book, I hope, gives people the practical tools to start building self-trust so that you can get into the best relationship of your life by listening to your body and intuition. Mm-hmm. But it does take those like baby steps to get there. Yeah. And in the book, I really break down how to do that. So if for anybody who feels like I can't possibly trust myself, I can't possibly trust my intuition, it is a buildable skill. And in this book, I help people with that.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the timeline, because I think it's so easy for us to go both ways, right? Going like, oh, it hasn't been that long, or it's been so long. What's wrong with me? It's been so long, or it's been a short amount of time and I shouldn't feel this bad because it's only been a few months that I felt. And, and really to give ourselves permission of like, it doesn't matter how fucking long. It's like the minute that we wake up to it, we can start doing something about it. The minute that we really like tap in and we're like, this isn't good for me, and we can notice that, then like you said, we can start building those building blocks, and whatever timeline that is for you, it's perfect. Like you're seeing it now. Like, thank God.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So beautiful. Okay. So this was just a random thing that you said. We talked about it more in the book. But one of the things that I think comes up a lot, where regardless of sexuality and sexual preference, but you briefly mentioned that this guy that you were dating, that you were in your first adult relationship with, was like, I need non-monogamy.
Yeah.
And brought this up with very strong conviction to it. And from the little bits in your book, and I won't give it away because I do think you should all just buy it and read it, the idea of like why it's so good, or why it's like really great for our brain, because we get to learn all these different ways of communication, and it really is this like higher growth, right? And so when we're presented, whether it's non-monogamy or maybe it's like a sexual preference that our partner is bringing to us, but this kind of thing, like how did you come to, even though you can understand that, like, non-monogamy would bring all these things, but I hear this with other sexual things, whether it's sharing partners or opening a marriage, or going to a strip club or watching porn together. But how did you allow yourself to like be open to like maybe, but then coming back to like, this is actually not for me? Because I think that comes up so often for us. Like, are we being closed off to something, or is this a really a no?
Yeah, I love this question. And Danielle Savory, only you would ask this question. Nobody else. I've done so many interviews. I've never been asked this question.
Yay.
I love it. Okay. So I'm kind of a research nerd. I'm very type A. I had this experience that I didn't write about in the book, but maybe in the next book, where before I'd met the guy who I was in a relationship with, before I was just swiping and like trying out experiences, I think. And I went on a date with somebody who we kissed afterward. It was very exciting, but also he's very like aggressive. And in a way that was like safe, but very like pulled me in strongly and gave me a kiss. I was kind of like, oh,
this reminds me of my dog, Bruce. He's a 97-pound pit bull, and he's like so loving and it's so safe, but it's like, we call it like aggressive love. Like it's just a little too much right now. I do not need your big sloppy tongue like down my throat. Love you.
Right. Not for me. This guy let me know that he was Bruce. Yeah, for sure. I love that. Not his real name. And he texted me later that he was a dom looking for a sub.
Yeah.
And I, again, hadn't had many sexual experiences, hadn't had, at that point, I was like, penetrative sex is, going back because I dropped my lip balm. But at that point, I was like, penetrative sex is sex, and I haven't had it yet. Where now I've deconstructed that idea that sex can be a lot of things, whatever. Okay. But I was like exploring having sex for the first time with this man who was very expressed in wanting a sub to his dom. And I went on a days-long research adventure. Looking up the different forms of dom subbing, looking up the different, like how to decide whether or not you want to do it, a checklist to figure out what you would do, what you wouldn't do, how to be radically communicative and open about what you would do, what you wouldn't do. I was like, this is okay. This is absolutely not okay. I maybe would be a yes to this if this were met, right? I created this whole checklist and like matrix decision-making. And I decided that I wanted to have that experience. I made this empowered decision. Turns out he ghosted me. Okay. So I did this like days long research for nothing. And then I had this moment where I was like in a ballet class and looking at myself, adult ballet class, looking at myself in the mirror thinking, you're so beautiful, Lily. Like you deserve to get what you want. And realizing that I actually didn't want that to be one of my first sexual experiences. I was settling for who was in front of me, what they were offering. But I had also done the research. So I'm glad it didn't work out, but I had done the research to figure out what I would want, what I wouldn't want. And I was, confident in that. Same thing happened with this, I believe I call him Dylan in the book. I need to brush up on the renames. This man I was with it was a bad relationship. He said, I want non-monogamy. I said, okay, I need some time to think about it during that. But I also said yes immediately, but knowing that I would take time to do research. So I went away and I did a ton of research. I read so much about non-monogamy. I was hearing, I was understanding, I was putting on paper, okay, I would want to be your primary partner. And I would want this to mean that we communicate in this way. Here's what I want. Here's what I don't want. Here's what I'm uncomfortable with. Here's what I'm fine with. I had laid it all out. But my partner at the time was not willing to do the actual work of defining the terms of a non-monogamy.
Which is such a key if you're opening up your marriage, everybody.
No, right.
All the experts say that. Like you have to have an agreement if you're going to go into that kind of a relationship, period.
And he would say the right things like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. But then none of the follow-up, none of the action, none of the communication, which was why I felt I was gaslit, honestly, because he would say this, like, I do want to communicate with you. I want to be non-monogamous, but I write about this in the book. What I realized after time is that he wanted all the benefits of being in an emotional relationship with me without any of the commitment. And non-monogamy is not non-commitment.
Right.
If you're doing it, ethically, which I think non-ethical non-monogamy is cheating. But I think, I was open to it. I did discover through this practice that it was not the right model for me in my emotional safety, and that I actually didn't care if people who were really into non-monogamy, bullishly so, said that was about my thoughts and not my actual needs. I was like, doesn't matter, actually. I don't want this. And so I'm not going to be sort of manipulated into wanting it more by this person who just wants the fringe benefits of being with me. So I do think that the discernment was helpful. The research was helpful. It empowered me. I know a lot about non-monogamy now. I can help my clients who want non-monogamy more effectively. Both and I realized it wasn't for me. And that when his words didn't meet his actions, like it was a sign that it was wrong for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And, what I'm hearing, like when you were explaining that whole thing, is I love how you were open, right? Like, and I think that's key, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but when I'm hearing you explain this situation, right, with both of these situations, you're like, maybe, right? And I think that's such a key point of like, maybe, like, let me do my research. Let me get curious. Let me see. Because I think what so many people like immediately assume is like it could just be like it's a total no without
Yeah.
even flirting with the idea. And I think that it's important for, whether it's non-monogamy, whether it's kink, whether it's like anal sex, whether it's, like listening to an audio erotica together, like whatever it is, like being like, maybe
Yeah.
giving yourself the space and the safety to like look into it a little bit
Yeah.
at a level that you feel comfortable with
Right.
before the immediate yes or the immediate no,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that is like our knee jerk reaction. And like what you were even saying, like, oh, maybe it's my thoughts. So much of those knee jerk reactions are based on our past beliefs, right? Are based on like our neural pathways of what's okay and what's not okay, or what's dirty or what's not dirty. But I love what you're saying here, because in both situations, you're like, hadn't considered that before. Let me take a look. And as you began looking into that, tapping into your body, you realize this actually isn't for me. But it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't from this place of like, I've just been told by society it's a no. So it's just going to be this no without
Yeah.
investigation.
Well, you got to get to know your own wants and I think the baseline is like getting to know how you want to feel in the right relationship or
Right.
relationships. That's my essence-based preferences process that I teach in the book, which is so central to my philosophy and
Yeah.
and process, which is you've got to know, like everybody says they want kind, funny, smart. Everybody says they want to feel
Yeah.
sexy when they have sex, or like they want to
Yeah.
feel like safe when they have sex emotionally and physically and all the like, of course. And
Yeah.
I want to get beneath the surface, like, and even explore more of how do you want to feel? What are the words you'd use to describe your experience of how you want to feel? How do you want to feel held? What does that look and feel like to you? What are the values and personality traits? If you're looking for like values and personality traits, then what are your version of kind, funny, smart?
Right.
What is it worldly? Is it creatively ambitious? Is it joyfully nerdy? Like knowing your root words and then having a definition that is in your language of how you want to feel in the right relationship. I think I encourage my clients to do the same with their sex lives.
Yeah.
What are your sex essence-based preferences? If you want to have a casual hookup, what are your preferences around who you want to casually hook up with? How do you want to feel with that person? How do you want them to hopefully show up in the world? Not with rigidity, not with like that rigid you shall not pass energy, and also not with open-minded pile of mush energy, like just somebody nice. I just want somebody nice, like coming in the middle with how do I want to feel in the presence of this person, and how can I tune in with my body to decipher whether or not I'm feeling that way, to determine whether or not I continue, is essential to landing in the right everything.
Right. Yeah. And I love this, like even, and you said something in there about like the casual, but I do think it's like you said, it's like getting back to that essence. Like what's even underneath this? Is this like, of course, like this depends too. How long have you been with this person? If you're going to consider these things, like I said, if you're in a long-term relationship and you're bringing up new stuff, again, how do I want to feel now? How do we want to bring that spice back? Like, what would that feel like for us? And then dating, right? Like there is still that, like you were saying, that essence preference, like what's really at the root of this.
Yeah. And the skill of being able to ask my partner, we've been together for about 7 years now. The skill of being able to ask, I'm making this mean X. Can I just check that story with you? Is that what you mean? Like, for example, I'm just gauging how much to share here. But for example, about anal sex, or like about, watching porn, or about like any of these pieces that can feel really safe or feel kind of sticky.
Yeah.
Whenever I feel any sort of sticky, icky, nervous, anxious about a conversation about our sex life or about something that Chris has expressed he wants, I have built up the skill imperfectly to say, okay, I'm kind of freaking out. I'm making this ask mean that you fill in the blank. Like I know for some
Aren't
clients
satisfied with
aren't satisfied or
Yep.
like you're dissatisfied, you're unhappy or whatever. And then we get to check that story and be open and honest with one another. And then you can, if you want to continue doing research about something or like, then you can, but starting with that baseline of like openness with your partner about like, okay, you just said this, I'm making up a story that it means this. What do you think about that? Is that what you meant? And then you can feel emotionally safe enough to be like, okay, I can take time to be curious now and figure out if it's a yes, no, maybe for this ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love that because I do think it's, especially those of us socialized as women, we like our mind can go to that place of like, wait, am I not enough? Like, is this not enough? Is what we have not enough when we hear an ask rather than like, oh, this could be a fun thing extra to do, right? Like this is, coming from this place of like, no, I love us. I love what we're doing. And I just thought this could be a fun thing to try. But you clarifying that is so huge. Yeah. So I love that you bring that up.
Well, and just like it's like totally awesome to say yes, it's totally awesome to say no too. Yeah. And I think that's a skill that I work on with my clients all the time is like how to bless and release people that are not right for them without the mind drama. Yeah. Same with like, allowing yourself to have your preferences and needs. I think for so long, I knew in my past relationship that non-monogamy didn't feel right to me, didn't feel good. Yeah. And I even think with a partner who was meeting all of my like non-monogamy desires, you know, I don't know that I would have liked it even then.
Yeah.
But I stuck around for a lot longer than I wish I had because I thought that what I want didn't exist. Yeah. And so it was more than just like this ask. But when I knew it was a no, I would never do that. I hope I would never do that again. I know I wouldn't, but it is about stepping away when your no is a no.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think, one thing I am curious, because you've said it a couple of times, you've used the word needs and you've used the word preferences. And I think, whether you're first starting to date somebody or you're rekindling an intimacy that has felt kind of stuck for a while, this question can come up between like, but you're not meeting my needs. You're not taking care of my needs. And I hear this oftentimes, in the heterosexual relationships that I work in like a husband being like, you're not meeting my needs because we're not having sex enough. Right. And I have my way of talking with my clients with it, but I really want to hear like, especially when you're starting to date someone and you're navigating these preferences and these needs, especially deeper into the dating and like we're in a relationship now. How do you decide like this person really isn't dating my needs or I'm not meeting their needs? Like when is there a compromise or it really is looked at as like a preference for these people?
Oh my goodness. What a good question. And I would love to hear your answer too.
Yeah.
I do think that this can be softened, like specifically the hetero relationship where the man is saying, I don't get enough sex. I'm having a reaction to him. You know what I'm saying? I'm having
from our feminist lens, we absolutely do. Right. But then you'll hear a woman say the same thing. Opposite. And I can see my bias because I don't have the same thoughts of her.
Right.
So that's where I've had to navigate because I think you and I both being from this like feminist lens and then this man being like, you're not meeting my needs sexually. Right. But then I've also coached the women who feel the same way about their man.
Right.
And my knee jerk from that like feminist lens of like, like how I would coach them. Right. But like getting into this more neutral spot of like, how do you really navigate the difference between a need and like, where are we willing to meet to compromise?
Well, isn't it all the latter? It has to be all the latter. It's not it has to be the, where am I willing to compromise, right? Yeah. Rather than a rigid, you must do this for me to, right? I think that this is a very big conversation and I don't want to paint in broad strokes here. And I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from my own experience with this. Danielle, your experience is in the like long-term relationship space and mine is in the newer, getting from single to being in the newer relationship.
your viewpoint on it, because I haven't worked
having
as
an
much in the newer relationship of like
right,
how to talk about
how to
that.
talk about it. Oh, you
Yeah.
just have an awkward, weird conversation. I think
Yeah.
if you're willing to, my funnest piece of advice right now, the one that I think is the most fun, is if you're willing to feel awkward, then you're unstoppable.
Yeah.
You'll get what
Mm-hmm.
you want. So I think that a lot of people are afraid of breaking the seal of having a conversation like this,
Yeah.
especially in a
Yeah.
new relationship of like, hey, I want to have sex more, or hey, I want to have sex less, or hey, I want to do like when you do this certain thing in bed, it doesn't actually feel good. I need you
Yeah.
to do it a different way, especially for people who haven't had a lot of sexual experience like I didn't. In it was trial by fire of figuring out how to
Right.
ask for what I needed in this intimate space that I hadn't been in before. So I think that if you're willing to feel awkward and you're willing to believe that you can't say the wrong thing to the right person,
Mm-hmm. I
which
love
is
that.
another one of my funnest pieces of advice. Hopefully people
Yeah.
feel that way. You cannot say the wrong thing to the right person. So if you are navigating specifically like your sex life with a new partner and you are nervous to ask for something or you're nervous to respond to their ask, just grounding and rooting in like, I
Mm-hmm.
can't say the wrong thing to the right person. So why don't I just say the thing and trust that we're both adults who can navigate a conversation?
Yeah.
And by the way, it doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean it's a one and done conversation necessarily. For an example that is not sex related, and I write about this in my first date write about this in the book too. When I went on my first date with Chris,
Yeah.
I was still healing from my ex and still healing from that. I was in therapy. I had waited a while to go on a date with Chris. I knew that something was there, but I was nervous to say yes because I knew I was still healing. But my body was just saying, go on a date at this point.
Yeah.
So I went on the date. I was late and I talked about my ex for 30 minutes, which is not something that I would recommend to people. It was not a recommendable thing. But you know what Chris did? He held my hands. He made me feel safe. He asked good questions. He was curious. He made me feel how I wanted to feel. And then a couple months later, he was able to set a boundary and say, hey, I don't want to talk about your ex anymore. I want to talk about us. Can you talk about that with your therapist or your friends? And so the right person, I know the right person will also be able to set boundaries, will be able to ask for what they need. So you don't have to like micromanage a hard conversation. You get to trust that the right person will make themselves apparent by how they show up in that conversation.
Yeah.
And so in terms of navigating like need versus preference, I think that the right person is going to ask, how can I love you better? And is going to be able to advocate for themselves. And it might be a little messy sometimes. It might feel a little sticky sometimes, and you may need we see a couples therapist also to navigate these complicated needs and wants. And we found great value from having somebody to listen to our communication and, share skills and tools to help us understand each other better. But I think like starting with, it's going to feel awkward. I can't say the wrong thing to the right person. Let me identify what I want. And these are preferences and I'm with the right person. So like, let's figure it out together, right? Your preferences will shift and change as you gather more information in this new relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That's very.
Did that answer your question?
It does. I think it's ongoing because it's not, I love how you answered this question because I think what you did by talking about like you can't say the right thing or the wrong thing to the right person, right? It's like really comes down to like creating safety in your nervous system through these steps, right? It's like creating safety in your nervous system that it's okay to feel awkward and I probably will. It's okay creating safety in your nervous system, like that, trusting that this person, if they are the right person, is like, I can't say the wrong thing. I might not say how I want, but I can't say the right thing. Again, all of this is coming back to like, really creating that safety for yourself, as we navigate these conversations. And I think that's so important. And I love also what you said about like clarifying the ask, because, especially when it comes to needs and preferences, and I've had to have that conversation with my husband a lot of times, right? Like if there especially is a need when you have a higher desire versus lower desire person, if we are talking about frequency of sex is, what are you feeling when you're getting that? Like we are having that. Like, what are you looking for in these connections or in these relationships? Like, really clarifying, like, where is this ask coming from? Because I'm just hearing it's not enough, right? Or I'm not enough, right? Or, and I think it's also good for us to get clear about what they're making that sexual experience together mean. Because if it's simply like a release of stress or a release of energy, and it's not as much about the connection, which I've had come up in some couples, and I'm like, you don't have to be available for that. Like, that is their responsibility to find ways to like release their stress or do whatever, you know? So I do think it's like case by case basis. But when you get down to it and you continue, and it's not like a one and done conversation, usually we can see where we are available or willing to compromise when we really see that sometimes what we think as a need is like a desperate, like, ask, like you said, I need you to fix my anxiety. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the thing, where we're looking at sex as this way to get a deeper need met that could be met in other ways and could be met by ourselves.
Yeah. I'll share something, and I don't know if I've shared very often, but I had learned the pattern of like giving sex in order to feel emotionally connected in past relationships.
Yeah.
Past relationships when I didn't feel connected. And even though my now husband 7 years ago was so incredible and gave me nothing but affirmation, I still had that behavior pattern of feeling a little insecure and being like, well, you want to have sex because I know that, right? And I think that is also a deeply, that I unlearned and unlearned that pattern. But it is having to do, I think, with patriarchal conditioning, that like I believed that I had to perform a certain way due to implicit and explicit messaging growing up. And learning about sex growing up and being in an abstinence only culture that really shamed people for having sex outside of marriage, and that it shouldn't be about your pleasure, and that doesn't actually matter, and that you need to be of service to your husband. I went to marriage ceremonies where a woman would vow to be subservient to her husband for the rest of her life, and the man would vow to be the leader of the relationship. My extended family laid hands on me and Chris when we were engaged in a prayer ceremony that we did not ask for or desire, and said, God, really help Chris lead this relationship. I was steeped in that culture. And I haven't been I have sort of extricated myself from that belief system for quite some time, both and it still exists inside me in some ways. And I think being aware of when is my patriarchal conditioning popping up in order to keep me safe, like that's continued work. And that's why I love coaching. That's why I love therapy, because like shit comes up. It's never her healing is never linear or over. And I think that my job as a human being is to show up more fully for myself. And thereby being a more present partner for my partner, and being a more present friend for others. But I think it has to start by centering myself. And I hope the same for those listening and our clients who are learning how to center themselves. And if, specifically for the, I want more sex, you need to meet this need. I think that calls back to we're not having sex as much as I expect to. I'm making up a story that means. Like that awareness.
You don't want me or whatever it is.
Like that
I'm
awareness.
not attractive to you anymore. You hear it all the time. Or we're not like that romantic, relationship. We're just more like roommates. There's a lot of stories. And I think that's such a key of like what you're saying is like, if we're really talking about a genuine, like, I see you and like, I do see this is important to you and I want to meet you, getting beneath a story of what that impulse ask be is like key to be able to navigate it with some sort of clarity and really being on both of your sides, like on the side of your relationship. And I love you. And of course I want to meet you in these ways. And also I love me. And I want to also respond to like what I'm available for. Yeah. So good. Okay. I love it. Okay. So I know that we could keep talking forever and ever. The one thing that I did want to quickly touch on before we get off, because I think it's so aligned with what we talk about here on It's My Pleasure. One of the things that you talk about a lot later in your book is this approach of like, when you focus on joy, when you
Yeah.
focus on like filling yourself up, how that makes dating not just easier, but like really is the work. So
Yes. Oh my God.
preach to the people, please.
I love this question. Joy is connective. Joy
Yes.
is connecting to yourself. Even knowing what brings you joy is a self-connection practice, not just floating through, not just disassociating, but coming back into your body, not shaming if that's a coping mechanism that you're working through, but just like coming back into your body, knowing what brings you joy is connecting to yourself. Therefore, I believe the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. I believe that this is dating is a microcosm, joy is a microcosm. If you pursue your joy and it's connecting you to yourself, joy is connective outside your house too.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're pursuing your joy, whether that is a pottery class or a trampoline class or a meetup or a hike or a quiet game board game night at your local board game place, or a house party where it's just like 3 people and you're just hanging out quietly, you pursuing your joy outside of your house expands your social circle, which is inherently the function of a dating app, to expand your social circle.
Yeah.
So you can really increase the effectiveness of your dating efforts by pursuing your joy.
Yeah.
By making new friendships. Whether or not somebody is like attractive to you at the pottery class doesn't actually matter. It's about practicing the art of making eye contact, saying hello, building a new friendship, building a connection, building that belonging into your life right now if you're single, before you ever meet your person, or if you're coupled, like building belonging into your life outside of your romantic relationship is really fundamental to our emotional health. And so, then, if you're single and dating, you can use the co-conspirator strategy to engage your friends, new friends, old friends, in helping you expand your social circle even more, setting you up with somebody new based on your essence-based preferences, or looking out for you at their next work conference or what have you. So I think that joy is this concept of joy in the book. I hope people feel that it's inherently permissive. It's okay to think in terms of your joy and your pleasure instead of thinking about what I have to do to meet the goal. It could be counterintuitively. It will be counterintuitively. Your desire will be met by pursuing your joy first, and then asking, like, what else? What else do I want? What else do I want? It will help you propel yourself forward into the right relationships, the right experiences for you, the right friendships, and will allow you to like look at the whole of your life in a more permissive way, right? Like, what if your sex life got to be more joyful? What would that look like? Just like a creative thought experiment. Or what if your friendship life got to look more joyful? Maybe you're stuck in a rut. Or what if you're like, and so the question of how do you make your dating life joyful is one of my favorite questions that people are very incredulous to, who are dating and single, because dating can be so existentially exhausting. But that's my bread and butter, right? Like, how can you give yourself so much freaking permission? How can you pursue the shit out of your joy so hard? How can you ask for what you want out loud and often every time you're pursuing your joy that guides you towards everything that is right for you?
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. And I love, all these reasons you listed off for joy, because I think it's so easy for us to not even intentionally, but exactly what I talk about on this podcast. We don't get intentional with pleasure. We don't get intentional with joy. But like when you make it your purpose, when that is the pursuit, when that is the aim, how many of these other pieces like begin to fall into place because you're not operating just out of obligation and duty. And, the other thing that I love about like the pursuit of joy and the pursuit of pleasure is like when you're going outside of your house, when you're doing in these things, like what we talked about at the beginning, like how it can feel really uncomfortable when you find your person, but also think about it as you are actually expanding your skill to feel good and to have that safety in our nervous system, right? Because if we don't practice feeling good, if we don't practice joy, if we don't practice pleasure, it's going to feel even more contrasting when you find your person. So also think of this as an act of like, you are creating safety in your nervous system to feel lit the fuck up. And when you create like that safety in your nervous system, when you do meet your person, you're going to be able to acknowledge that they do actually make you feel lit up and you'll feel safe.
Yeah.
Which is so good. So juicy. Okay, everybody needs to go get this book. I read it in like 2 days. It was so good, so helpful. It's called Thank You, More Please, which I even just love that title and what that indicates. Again, expanding our capacity for all the good stuff. But tell us, where do we find you, all of your amazing advice? How can people work directly with you? Because after listening to this, I think we all know that it's not as quick and easy as we think, getting out of our head and into our feelings.
Yeah.
So tell us all the places that they can
Awesome.
be with you.
So you can buy my book anywhere books are sold. Comes out June 11th. And I'm so excited for you to get your hands on this book. I want everybody listening who is curious about this book, whether you are single or coupled folks, this is going to help you support your single friends better, just like they showed up for you at your wedding or you at your anniversary party or whatever. You get to show up for them in their dating life. So pick up this book if you're coupled and you want to help your single friends more effectively and more compassionately, potentially. And then for my single friends, pick a copy up, give a copy to a friend, do a book club, bring in belonging to your dating life right now before you ever meet your person. And these steps are going to change your life. They're feminist as fuck. They're very clear. It's strategy and mindset. And it's going to change the way you show up in your love life. It's going to change how you can attract the right partner. And then if you want to work with me, you can go to datebrazen.com. I have 2 ways to work with me right now. There is VIP one-on-one coaching where I will guide you step by step through creating the most joyful and epic love life possible, even if you just got divorced, even if you're a late bloomer. And then I also have a group program called the Brazen Breakthrough, where you are going to learn how to attract the right partner with a joyful as fuck dating life, which is a group program. You get to make new friends. You get to get coaching weekly. You can find out more information at datebrazen.com, and you can follow me everywhere at Date Brazen. And you can also listen to the Date Brazen podcast.
I love it. So many wonderful ways to just absorb all your brilliance and just your enthusiasm for this. So thank you again. Okay, everybody, as always, it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you here this week. And I was so wonderfully ecstatic to have this conversation with Lily and you. Make sure you go and check out her stuff because yes, you do deserve more, please, more of the joy, more of the good connections that you are meant for. And I can't wait to talk with you next week. Take care.